The London Times reported in June of 2010 that American troops are now operating in 75 countries, killing people. President Obama secretly sanctioned a huge increase in the number of U.S. Special Forces. The JSOC command is now 25,000 people that search and destroy missions against Al-Qaeda all over the world. This increase is far in excess of special forces that operated under the Bush administration and reflects how aggressively Obama is pursuing this global war despite his public rhetoric of engagement and diplomacy. Somehow this information didn't make it into the U.S. media. Permanent global war is clearly one of the consequences of 9/11. Now the neoliberal forces of private capitalization, including the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the core central banks, represent a transnational corporate class of very powerful people who are seeking nothing less than the complete control and domination of working people worldwide. 9/11, 2001 opened the floodgates for the powerful to expand world control. The U.S. NATO military industrial media empire is a police force in support of this transnational corporate class. We're talking less than 1% of the people in the world, even smaller than that run the big corporations, run the central banks. And now NATO is their police force. This police force operates at both a physical, repressive level and a deep psychological, cultural one. The NATO-US wars of aggression and occupation seek not only to achieve control of vast natural resources in the world, but through psychological tactics of fear and awe, strive to achieve a paralysis of fear embedded inside of a hyper-real entertainment environment. Corporate media stands willing to propagandize humans into a state of inaction and fear. This propaganda reaches into the very depths of our psychological selves and even reaches into the minds of our children. Now the corporate media today consists of primarily 10 major corporations in the U.S. They have 118 members, fewer people that are in this room, on their board of directors. They in turn sit on 20% of the corporate 1,000 big corporations. So they're interlocked with the major banks, the military contractors, the insurance companies. They set the parameters of what is acceptable news in America. This news is top down. News filled with propaganda, misinformation, designed primarily to entertain and not inform. Corporate media has completely abdicated their responsibility to the First Amendment, and they give new life to Neil Postman's famous description of America as the best entertained, least informed society in the world. Since 9/11, 2001, the public relations firms have experienced phenomenal growth. Three largest are Omnicom, WPP, and Interpublic Group. Together, these firms employ 163,000 people in 170 countries worldwide. Not only do these monstrous firms control a massive amount of wealth, they have a network of connections in the international institutions with government, multinational corporations, global dominance policy groups, the central banks. These public relations firms create news stories, and corporate media accepts them as if they were the authors. WPP, a UK conglomerate, has an impressive list of subsidiaries, most of whom were independent before 9/11. I mean, Rubicon, Hurston Marsalis, Ogilvy and Mather Worldwide, Helen Knowlton, and numerous others. Now remember Helen Knowlton, they were the ones during the first Gulf War that created a national outrage by putting a young woman before Congress who claimed that she saw the Iraqi soldiers dump the babies out of the incubators in the hospital in Kuwait and steal them. We found out later that she was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador, Naira, and Helen Nolan had trained her to cry, present this testimony falsely with the full consent of the White House. In the early 90s, Chris Hedges' work covered the Gulf War for the New York Times. 10 years later, he wrote, the notion that the press was used in the war is incorrect. The press wanted to be used. They saw it as part of the war effort. Truth-seeking independence was far from the corporate media agenda. They were eager to be of service to the state during war. Media consolidation and expansion of public relation firms in the world has resulted in what we call managed news. This is deliberate. This is not just accidental. The corporate media is deeply interlocked in the military-industrial complex and the global dominance policy groups in the US, Europe, Japan, transnational corporate class. The media is increasingly dependent on various governmental and corporate sources of news. Maintenance of continuous news programs require a constant feed. MSNBC, Fox, CNN all have offices in the Pentagon, at the White House, public relation companies that represent government and corporations, top-down news they want us to hear. Managed news includes both the release of specific stories intended to build public support, as well as deliberate non-coverage of news stories that might undermine U.S. goals. Jeremy Scahill was writing in The Nation in 2009 how Blackwater at that time, now known as Z, operates in the Pakistani city of Karachi, gathering intelligence, and they help direct the U.S. military drone bombings in that country. Recently revealed documents show that Blackwater Z is expanding its corporate reach by providing military intelligence services for such agencies as Canadian military, Netherlands police, Disney, and even Monsanto. Through their intelligence brands, Total Intelligence Solution, Monsanto infiltrates animal rights groups and informs on them to Monsanto so they can counter them. The coordinator of Blackwater's covert CIA paramilitary officer, Enrique Prado, has set up a global network of foreign operatives, offering their deniability as a big plus. Blackwater customers, according to company documents, the CIA has long used proxy forces to carry out extra-legal actions or to shield U.S. government from involvement in unsavory operations and scrutiny. In these cases, deniability, foreign forces, sometimes these people don't even know who they're working for. There's been little coverage of how the story from Global Research in May of 2007, how U.S. capabilities for cyber war were announced by the then Secretary of Defense Robert Gates as an activization of the Pentagon's first computer command and the world's first comprehensive military service cyber operation. CyberCon is located at Fort Meade, Maryland. It's the home of the National Security Agency. Nick Fielding and Ian Coben reported in commondreams.org in March of last year that a Californian corporation had been awarded a contract with the U.S. Central Command to develop what was described as online persona management services that would allow one service person to control up to 10 separate identities. CENTCOM Commander Bill Spig said the technology supports classified blogging activities on foreign language sites to enable CENTCOM to counter violent extremism and enemy propaganda against the U.S. Once developed, the software would allow U.S. service personnel working around the clock on one location to respond to emerging online conversations with a coordinated blog post, tweets, retweets, chat room posts, and other interventions. So it's a interpenetration by the military into the internet for propaganda and control. Details of the contract suggest this location will be MacDill Air Force Base near Tampa, Florida, home of U.S. Special Operations Command. One of the most important stories that Project Censored has covered in the last decade has to do with the number of civilian deaths in Iraq. This is something that corporate media just simply doesn't cover. Over 1 million Iraqi civilians have died since we invaded that country in 2003. There's been 3 national surveys done, Opinion Business Research and 2 by Johns Hopkins University. One in 2003 that said 100,000 deaths, one in 2006 that said 600,000 deaths, and one at the end of 2007 that said 1 million deaths. Now these are people who died, who were extra. Their families were said they died from war violence. Now mostly the U.S. people in the U.S. believe that it's Iraqis killing Iraqis. Well, the Johns Hopkins survey made it very clear. Half these deaths were caused by U.S. military action. Bombs in villages where there's no reporters, and firefights in cities where whole families were decimated. So we have killed over 500,000 people in Iraq alone, let alone in Afghanistan. And these million-plus deaths, they're undeniable. These are people who died. Millions more have been wounded physically and mentally. 5 million people displaced from their homes. And the continuing occupation by U.S. forces has guaranteed a monthly death rate of thousands of people. Carnage so severe and so concentrated, we equate it with some of the most heinous mass killings in the world. We've done more bombs on Iraq than all of World War II that were dropped by both sides. We can drop that kind of tonnage of bombs, we can't deliver food to Somalia. We're faced with a serious moral dilemma. Murder and war crimes were conducted in our name. 9/11 kicked it off. That was a piece that we have to realize how this has continued and expanded and what we're up against. Yet most Americans have no idea the magnitude of death. The Associated Press in 2009 said only 87,000 Iraqis have died. 10%, not even that. And they put that story out 3 times because of the Johns Hopkins study. They put it out in 2009, in April, again in July, and again in October. And then just this week, the Washington Post put out a story that said 12,000 Iraqis have died from suicide attacks. And, you know, so these numbers are so small compared to the magnitude of the deaths that have occurred. We know this is deliberate. We know this is managed news. For the 2nd year in a row, more U.S. soldiers have killed themselves than have died in combat. Excluding accident and illness, 462 soldiers died in combat last year, while 468 committed suicide. So we have a military where the veterans are coming out after suffering post-traumatic stress, high risk, and these are the 468 were people who were active in the military. The study, we now know that 47% of all veterans with PTSD have thought of suicide. The internal anguish the soldier experiences returning from Iraq and Afghanistan can be far more severe than experienced during live external combat. More than 2 million American troops have served in Iraq and Afghanistan since 2001. Those who do return often suffer from physical, psychological, and cognitive traumas. 40 per 100,000 are killing themselves between 20 and 24 years of age. Now, if you add those numbers up, we have, since the beginning of the Iraq War, 50,000 veteran suicides. These are amazing numbers. You will not see this in the corporate media anywhere. In 2008, Iraq and Afghan veterans are 75% more likely to die in a car accident, 148% more likely to die in a motorcycle accident. By calculations, these figures reach this level of 50,000 that have committed suicide. So literally, of these 2 million people, the high-risk behaviors, the trauma has been tremendous. That's the cost of war. That's the human cost here, human cost of the families and the detrimental impacts that we've done all over the world. And this is continuing. The Obama administration has quietly put forth in practice the escalation of the policy left over from the Bush administration. Presidential international assassination programs. Court documents, evidence from Human Rights Watch and special UN reports show U.S. citizens and anyone in the world suspected of encouraging terror is put on a death list. And they can be assassinated. And there are assassination teams, part of special forces all over the world that are operating today. This is a moral, ethical, and legal analysis of assassination is completely lacking inside the corporate media. We just don't know. The American military presence in Afghanistan consists of fleets of aircraft, helicopters, armored vehicles, weapons, equipment, troops, and facilities, generating millions of tons of hazardous waste and radioactivity. What have the Americans done with all the waste that people in Afghanistan ask? The chilling answer is all of it has been buried, dumped, or discreetly disposed in the air, soil, and groundwater in the surface waters of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is the dumping ground for foreign armies. It's a toxic nightmare. Tons of depleted uranium. Children born in Fallujah today, 1 out of 3 is born with a birth defect. So we've seen food prices increase, starvation growing worldwide, yet at the same time we're spending more money than the rest of the world on building empire. And this is all coming out of 9/11. But this problem is much bigger than simply getting 9/11 to be debated. We have to debate empire. We have to debate why this is happening to us in the world. We need 9/11 proof for world peace and freedom. These are amazing kinds of things with all these people dying. And if you watch corporate media, you're literally embedded in a state of excited news and entertainment and all this kind of stuff, which is kind of an excited delirium of knowinglessness. You don't know what's going on. We don't know what the powerful are doing. We're focused out, and this is deliberate. They want us to not be that way. They want us not to be aware of what's happening. So we have to go back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and go back to our roots of what we believe are the core values of democracy in this country. Yes, we need 9/11 truth, but we need 9/11 truth and truth about the military empire of this world and our involvement in it and the transnational corporate class, which is screwing us all over.
With gas. One more applause, please, for Dr. Peter Phillips.